All right. Thank you very much. It's my great pleasure to welcome all of you today. My name is Maurice Khatebe, the head and the director of Wits Business School. As one of the leading business schools in Africa, it is always important that we have impact. And how do you do impact is to continuously making sure that our research programs are relevant, impactful, and also publish a lot of thought leadership material in our journals. But more importantly, to have these dialogues that we've been having for so many months now. We've been very privileged to have a lot of leading lights in the industry, eminent business people, and leaders in the political space, as well as also in the state-owned enterprises participating in this forum. And we are very pleased because this is where we debate, engage about the challenges we're facing in this nation and in this continent, and also about the solutions, more importantly, solutions that we want to focus on in this. It is our mission here at WBS to really develop leaders that are agile, competent, but more importantly, ethical leaders, because without ethics, we've seen the challenges we're facing in our nation. Particularly the report of Zondo is telling us all the gory details that have happened. So it's very important that we continue focusing on that aspect. We invite leaders that uphold ethical behavior and uphold ethics as their key value. And that's why we've got Natascha today. Natascha Viljoen, I'd like to introduce you and welcome you. Thank you very much. And I want to particularly thank you because you are far away from South Africa, and then you have taken a real challenge of actually participating while you are speaking from Australia. Thank God for technology and Teams and Zooms. We can have all these meetings as easy as if you're around here. But let me tell you a little bit about Natascha. Natascha is the CEO of Anglo American Platinum. Natascha was appointed as CEO of Anglo American Platinum in April 2020, just in the heart of COVID. You must have had a challenging time there. He's also a member of Anglo American PLC Group Management. Prior to that, Natascha worked for BHP, coal and chrome businesses in South Africa, including as a general manager of BHP Klapspruit Collier, Modikwe joint venture between Anglo America and African Rainbow Minerals and Anglo Gold. Natascha began her career at ISCO as a trainee engineer. That's a long way in 1991. But Natascha is now ranked amongst, in 2021, amongst the top 50 Forbes magazine's most powerful women international list. This is an accolade, especially being a Women's Month today, this month. So we're celebrating women leaders as part of this dialogues that we're having. She's served on a number of boards, African universities and of Cape Town, Stellenbosch, Queensland's universities, in Australia, and has been a non-executive director of board of Kumba. She's a metallurgical engineer and holds a Bachelor of Engineering from Northwest University, and an executive MBA, cum laude, UCT. So Natascha has really been active in the space, and that's what we want here. We want people who have participated, rose through the ranks, and spearheaded new technology development in the mining industry across the mining sector disciplines and in 8 commodities. So huge contribution. In short, she's a kind of a leader we aspire to graduate. And that is why we invite leaders like this one, so that our students, our MBA students and master students and PDM students that are here will be inspired by this kind of leadership. Thank you very much, Natascha, for the time and you've set aside for us today. We're looking forward to this conversation. I will hand over to Prof. Mills. He doesn't need any further introduction. Prof. Mills is our professor in the international business, as he has also graciously assumed the role of being a director, development and partnership, because as a school, we want to focus on partnershiping with our employer organizations as well as academic institution, and he is leading that charge. And if you are an alumni, he's also looking after the alumni. So if you want to send any comments on alumni, please send them to Prof. Mills now. And if he's also looking after our career management services, again, if you need support on your career, Prof. Mills. So he's a seasoned moderator. So over to you, Prof. Go for it.
Thank you very much, Maurice Radebe, Director of WBS Business School. My name is Mil Soko, Professor of International Business and Strategy here at WBS Business School, and I too welcome you all to this WBS Leadership Dialogue. Thank you, Maurice, for introducing our guest today, Natascha Viljoen. I too have been looking forward to this conversation, and thanks to all of you for joining us here today. You'll have an opportunity to ask questions of our guest. Please use the chat box to write your questions or comments, and I will relay them to our guest. In case you miss anything, this event is being recorded and will be made available on our YouTube channel. Natascha, a very warm welcome to WBS Business School. We are very pleased that you able to join us today to talk about your leadership and business journey.
Good evening, Prof. Mills, and thank you for that introduction, Prof. Maurice. I think it's important that we recognize the work that you've done for getting that distinguished designations of being called a professional, and I wanted to use the opportunity to use that. So thank you for that kind introductions. And it's indeed a big pleasure for me to be here. I think it is an important part of our journeys as we rise through our careers to also give back to the up and coming people who needs to shape the future for all of us. And certainly in my experience, it is the young generation who are brave and absolutely clear on what they want in the future. And if I compare them to my children, I've got two young adults, 20 and 22. They challenge every paradigm. They don't believe anything I say, and I learn a huge amount of them. From them. So pleasure to be here and hoping to give a little bit back through this process today.
Thank you. So I would like to begin this conversation by talking about your childhood influences, your education, and your early career. You grew up in the mining town of Klerksdorp, and your father worked as a hoist driver for what used to be called Val Reeves and Uranium, and you frequently went with him to work. Firstly, Natascha, please tell us about what it was like, spending time with your father at his workplace, and secondly, explain to us how this experience influenced your career path.
Yes, thank you, Prof. Mills. So as you pointed out, my dad worked for the gold industry for his entire career, and a hoist driver is the person who controls it's really a big lift for those of our attendees who do not know. In the deep level gold mines, it's the hoist that runs up and down the shaft. And when he worked night shift, and particularly when what he was called on the man winder means he would put the shift of workers down and there would be a period of time that he's got a bit of a break. I would go with him on night shift and he will take me out onto the bank area where all the materials and people will go down the shaft and you will get the ore coming out from underground. And I think the heartbeat, the technology, the absolute human ingenuity that goes into the mining process are the things that stuck with me. Sometimes I got addicted to the smell of anthrax, which is the explosives that we use, because when the ore comes out from underground, you can still smell it. And it is in that energy, and that energy that talks about the potential that really stuck with me. And I think that's where my interest began in the mining industry. So it runs deep in my veins. And not only does it run deep in my veins, it also gave me an opportunity to do what I'm doing today. I learned. I had an opportunity to learn through so many opportunities in the mining industry. I've seen the impact, both positive and negative, that mining has been making and still will be making many years to come. And I've seen in that opportunity to also impact and give back, and in a positive way.
Yeah. You studied metallurgical engineering and later obtained a master's in business administration. How did these two academic qualifications prepare you for your leadership role? And do you think they are a good combination to have? And also, do you think that acquiring solid operational experience is important in mining or any other business? How important is acquiring solid operational experience?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So to start off with my academic career, I think the benefit of studying, and I happen to study engineering, but I think it's true for any university or any tertiary. Let's rather refer to a tertiary qualification. The biggest benefit of a tertiary qualification is taking your ability to think to a different level. Whilst you are certainly picking up the foundational building blocks for your discipline, the ability to critically analyze information, to learn how to learn and to continuously learning and apply that learning into day-to-day activities. Yeah, I would argue we're all part of important building blocks that formal study gave me. I like to refer to my executive MBA as an experience rather than it was a life building and developing experience rather than an academic experience. As I've done it as part of whilst I was in full-time employment, it teaches you so much, not only about, again, the actual academic content. I was way more mature at the time I did that. I've completed that in 2013. I did it through Marijuana. I was working for Lonmin at the time, and it was in that period that we had Marijuana as well. And it had so much opportunity for me to take the tools that I've learned, both in the classroom, the networking with peers in the classroom, the networking with educators and lecturers in the classroom, and really shaped my thinking around how I should be thinking very different around events like Marijuana. So I think that strong foundation is a very important starting point. After I finished my engineering degree, I came to my dad on the footplot, as they called it. And he congratulated me with finishing my degree. And he said, just be clear on one thing. The fact that you've finished your engineering degree does not mean you know anything. You actually know nothing. You now go and learn from the people who make it happen on a day-by-day basis. Mm-hmm. I've so often reflected this to young engineers or new employees coming into the business. Putting a grounding in your academic education by really understanding what it means in the people's lives where it gets applied on a daily basis. Very often I see graduates coming out of university with a big chip on their shoulder, and they are starry-eyed looking at a red carpet all the way to the corner office. The reality of that is, unless you understand, and I like to use the reference of a rock drill operator underground. These are the people who work physical work underground in narrow stopes, drilling an 8-hour shift to make sure that we can mine. Those are people that get up 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. They make their way in a bus or a taxi all the way to the workplace. They very often have to travel 2 to 3 kilometers by foot to get into their workplace underground. They do a full day work. They go back and they are a father, they are a mother, they are a leader in the community. So those are the people who are the foundation of our society. Those are the people who gives us the building blocks to when we then end up in a role where we take decisions about people's lives, where we take decisions around the long-term sustainability of businesses. Those are the people we're taking decisions for. Those are the people that we need to support in making sure that we can secure their livelihoods for the long term. So understanding who they are and what their daily lives look like is as important as that academic learnings. And that's how you then apply and understand the impact of your academic content in the real world.
Natasha, you've been in the mining industry for nearly 3 decades, but your first job was as a metallurgical engineer at the then state-owned, ISCO, Iron and Steel Corporation. That was your first job.
Yeah.
Just tell us about your first job. What was it like holding your first job, your memories, especially given that there were so few women in that industry during those years?
Yeah, Prof. Mills, you asked about the earlier influences in my life. I think I've been absolutely blessed with parents who grew up in a very different environment to where I grew up. My father was an orphan. My mother's dad was an alcoholic. So they've really come. My father actually grew up in a mud hut, interestingly enough. And for them, I think it shaped their view of the world. And in a time where it was unheard of for girls to study engineering, there was no boundaries for them. There was no reason why both myself and my sister studying directions that was generally targeted for men. So by the time I started working at ISCO, people often ask me, so what it is like to be a female in a man's world? And I would often say, well, I don't see the difference from where I'm sitting, because from where I'm sitting, I only see men. But the reality is, walking into the control room at the first time at ISCO with really hardcore men that worked very hard on a daily basis, hot, unpleasant environments, but the whole control room was plastered with pornography on the walls. And being reminded of my father's kind of guidance on keep your head down, learn from the people. For the first couple of weeks, I sort of did my job, went along with it until the point that I just couldn't take it anymore. And I went to the foreman who I was reporting to, and I said, hey, probably a little bit of an unorthodox request. But, as a female coming and working in this working environment on a daily basis, I can't do that. And accolades to the men at the time, I think it was something that they got so used to, creating that awareness. By the time I arrived back the next day, everything was removed. And it was, I think, an indication of how the industry started to change as we saw more and more women coming in. And I can tell you so many stories where it has been hard and it's been easy. We've seen support by industry, by our male colleagues, as much as we've seen barriers put in our way. But generally, I think from where I started at ISCO at the time to where we are today, the world is moving on. Has it moved on as far as we need to? Not yet. We still have significant amount of work to do as an industry and as a society for that matter. But it has certainly moved on from the day that I walked into a pornography plastered control room to where we are today.
Just to say to our audience, a reminder, if you have a question or comment, please type it in the chat box and I'll relay to our guest, Natascha Viljoen, CEO, Anglo American Platinum. Now, Natascha, over the years, you are a formidable woman and a formidable leader, and you have earned a reputation as a brilliant, very accomplished metallurgist, as well as a 10-round, a specialist, turnaround specialist. I saw that, you played a very important role during your time at Lonmin Mine, in terms of turning around one of the divisions which was struggling. Could you please tell us what this division, what challenges it was faced with, and how you went about implementing this turnaround?
It's again a really good question. You take me far back in my history. My goodness. So I was vice president for the concentrators when I started working for Lonmin. And again, just for the audience benefit, if you look at the platinum mining value chain, you mine the ore from underground or in open pits. And the first step that you do is you break the rock into smaller pieces to separate the valuable minerals from the waste rock. And that all happens in the concentrator. So I think that was a really technical role with its foundation and in its heart in the people who made it happen. But the first step was certainly to understand what was the original intent and potential of both the ore body that we mined and the asset and the capital deployment in that asset that was built. And there was a number of different concentrators that we used. There was also a very important part of ensuring the reliability, the asset integrity and reliability. So that really talks to how stable the operations run, whether you have breakdowns, how you maintain it. And certainly in my career, I've learned how important maintenance of all of your assets are. A deficit in maintenance, 1 year of deficit in maintenance, the right level of maintenance can take you up to 3 years to consider what's happening in Eskom and the history of Eskom. We can see the downside of not looking after your asset appropriately. Then considering the original design, because students on the line who does design work, your design work is very often, your design work is shaped around the purpose of what you're designing for. And if the purpose change, your design outcome. So going back to that original purpose of the design and how you match that with the ore bodies that we've mined. And you can, the big question on that is, why is that important? Now, if you consider, and there's a continuous link that I want to make between the technical side of the business and the ethics part of what you referred to earlier that closely relates in our world to an ESG agenda as well. If you consider that the ore body that we mine belongs to the people of South Africa, the money that we use to either build the plant or to operate or to pay salaries, that capital belongs to our investors. And then we've got the beautiful people that we have in the mining industry that make all of this happen. Now, it is important for us to run these assets well and to extract every last ounce of value out of the ore body, because if we waste, there's less value for that needs to go back to our stakeholders, both our social and our financial stakeholders. And that is why it was so important. The other thing I want to touch on is culture, the culture of the team. This is a team of people right through to the operators and the artisans who generally had a fairly long tenure and used to run plants that was benchmark in the PGM industry. So I was very disappointed when I arrived there and realized that we've lost that capability to run assets at benchmark. And it was interesting, following my dad's advice, listening to the operators on how they used to operate, what are the things that they used to do and how things has changed, and just bringing them back to that original intent. And a combination of asset integrity back to original design intent and using the people's skills and knowledge, we have turned around that assets in a big way, to the extent that we were certainly setting the benchmarks on recoveries, on throughputs, and in that way extracting the right level of value for all of our stakeholders.
Here's a question and comment here from Lauren George. Natasha, you're such an inspirational woman. and human being and truly lead by example. How did you manage the very fragile balance of a demanding career and young family?
Yeah, that is an interesting one. I think firstly, thinking that there's ever any balance is probably a little bit naive. There's never any balance. I think there's always a sacrifice for some reason. And I think it's that reason and the reason on why you are willing to make the sacrifices and the sacrifices that you do make in the end of the day. So firstly, I was very clear on my purpose, on what I would like to achieve and what I thought I would be able to do with my career. This is a little bit of a very personal share, but when I then fell pregnant with my son, which my husband and I didn't plan for because we couldn't see how we balance 2 professional careers and raise people who can add value to society. So quite a bit of introspection that we had to do at the time. And we've set up very deliberately a very strong support system. So didn't spare any financial investment or being very careful on who we selected to support us in raising a family. For the rest of it, a significant time sacrifice. And it does come in my case, it came at as a personal time sacrifice, because between work and children, nothing else happened. And but it was a sacrifice I was willing to make, and it was a deliberate decision that I am willing to make that sacrifice. It was also a very deliberate decision between my husband and I to say, well, this is a partnership on how we take it forward. And if I can give any advice, these things do not happen by accident. It is important that you take deliberate decisions on it and be very clear on what are the sacrifices that you are willing to make. Suddenly now my children, as I mentioned earlier, they're young adults. In some way, they need more and more intensive feedback and support, but the time I need to spend with them is less. And now I have time to get back to stuff that I love, like training and being in the outdoors and going for long walks that I didn't have the benefit to do for many years. But I won't change that for the world.
Yeah. The other questions we shall relate to, thematically later. Right now, I just want to ask you about one of the darkest periods in the history of South African mining, which coincided with your time at Lonmin, and that is the Marijuana Massacre. You were at Marijuana when this happened. In your view, Natasha, what do you think went wrong, at Marijuana that led to so much conflict and bloodshed? And do you think the key stakeholders in the mining industry, and including the South African government, mining companies, labor unions, and mining communities, have learned the right lessons from those tragic events?
Yeah, Prof. Mills, that was certainly one of the darkest periods of time in mining history. I believe as an industry, we've taken learnings and significant learnings out of it. And we can see the indications of that across the industry. Reflecting back at the time, Marijuana has now happened 10 years ago. This year it's 10 years. But the reality is that I think the start of Marijuana happened way earlier than that. It happened around 2008, where the industry was, and all of us would remember the financial crisis we were in as globally. And as a company, we needed to take certain decisions. And any incident like that, it's never a single thing that make an incident like that happen. It's normally a number of things that start to stack up that ultimately ends up. But one of the contributing factors were the fact that we had a constituent of employees who felt that between the work that they do and the need for them to generate a livelihood, the income just didn't balance. And one of the contributing factors in 2008, I remember as a company, we sat down and we had to take a decision on, we had quite a bit of capital investment commitments towards building houses. But we also had to do a big restructuring in the business. And it was a trade-off between how many people do we need to retrench if we build houses or we don't build houses. And it's one of those kind of moments in a leader's life that you have to do trade-offs, and there's not a clear right or wrong answer. And I think the biggest learning for me out of this was that was the first one. We've taken this decision a good 4 years before Marijuana happened. And being clear on the long-term impacts that some of our short-term decisions have is really important. And it's a difficult thing to do because it is impossible for us to see the future. None of us know exactly how the future is going to pan out. So you need to be able to think through scenarios and certain risk that could transpire, and you will never know whether you were right or wrong. But those are some of the fundamental decisions that we started to take way earlier than when Marijuana actually happened. The other big learning for me was how we engage with our employees, how we engage with our employees as unique individuals who, as I referred to earlier, are members of their communities, very often leaders in our communities. And at a time when we were in the thick of things during Marijuana, there was again a difficult decision point where we've seen these colleagues of ours, we've seen them killing some of their own colleagues, we've seen them killing police, we've seen them killing security members, then requiring or asking for management to come and talk to them. You can see how that predicament is a difficult one. So, well, how do we protect lives? Whilst it's really important to reach out and talk to the people who's sitting on the copy that's got a very specific unhappiness that they need to resolve. And that conflict situation, we should never underestimate understanding how we go into conflict situations. And it's one of those areas that using specialists in their field, people who work through conflict are specialists in their field, bringing parties of opposite objectives, opposite views together and resolving with the lowest possible level of energy. And how we think and how we thought about a group of people who were armed and by evidence, we perceive them as being dangerous, shaping that conversation and turning it on its head. And I can't help but wonder if we had a different approach to conflict management on how we could have resolved that matter in a different way. And that conflict management is a thing that we see on a daily basis today. We see the big need from our social stakeholders in a country where we have youth unemployment of 64%, youth like probably many of your listeners who's done a degree or they finished school, they are excited about a future, and there's just suddenly none. Mm-hmm. And if you consider that need to get on with your life and make something and contribute, and there's nothing, how do we bring those parties together in a world that we then see daily conflict, where nothing that we do as mining, with all our warts and all, no extent of work that we do can ever be good enough because of the huge need that we have in our country? How do we shape that in a different way and make it constructive? Because at the same time, I think if we can unlock the potential of the youth in this country, there's just no end to it. But it is how we think about our people that we engage with on a daily basis that is another big learning point for me. The last thing is probably after Marijuana, one of the biggest criticisms we took as a company, but that was true for many mining industries, is why are the communities around mining so poor?
Mm.
And we did an exercise where we just followed the money. And it was interesting that even in salaries and wages, there was less than 15% of the money that went through procurement, salaries and wages, taxes, that remained behind in the communities, in our doorstep communities. And other than building relationships with our communities, rebuilding trust with our communities, thinking differently around how we engage, how we do conflict management, that certainly in my company, there's a number of examples on how we're changing that. Local economic development, doorstep community spend are all critically important for us. And as a company, Anglo American Platinum, I can talk for us specifically, we've made huge strides in developing local entrepreneurs, local businessmen and women to not only do what we originally started, smaller kind of contracts like cleaning contracts or PPE manufacturing, but also bigger contracts like mining contracts and transport contracts that can help the community really getting a different kind of economic activity going. Because that economic activity is required for us to get a social context that allows people to be uplifted, or in the world that we're operating today with high unemployment accentuated by the COVID, 2 years of COVID, just securing livelihoods. And I think the two, between mining, extracting value, and developing that value potential for our communities through our employees as well, is just totally intertwined.
All right, I want to move on to Anglo American Platinum shortly, but before I do that, there's a question that I would like you to answer, Natascha, from Sinomneti Mashele. Good day, Natascha. I'm a female metallurgist in coal mining with 8 years in operations. I would like to know how you made the transition from ops to corporate mining, both mentally and realistically.
Yeah, I think the first thing is, as I gave advice to some of our, or can continue to give advice to our young people coming into the business, getting dirt under, well, let me talk about me, making sure that I had hands-on experience and ensuring that I do the best work I could at every step of the way. I think I learned a tremendous amount. I've built a gut feel for the business, and I've referred to that gut feel through really making sure that we learn from the people who does the work, because that are all parts that enable us to take the right decisions by the time you get into a management role. I had always had directionally knew what I would like to do with my career, and I always had a view that I think I've got the potential to run a global mining company. But that was never the aim for what I did. It was directionally giving me guidance that when opportunities came my way, I can assess them against what I would like to do with my career. Then using every opportunity to do the best possible job and to learn as much as I give back in every role, and then assess the opportunities and take them on. I very often also taken opportunities that I felt I wasn't entirely ready for yet. I very often punched above my weight to take on these opportunities and then use the people around me to learn and to progress and making a success in the various roles. I think the last thing I want to comment is, do not underestimate the change in the operating and environment. An direct operational environment where you work with artisans and operators on a daily basis has got a very different culture and politics than when you step into a corporate environment. Take time to understand what it is. Take time to understand how you maneuver with integrity, always intact, through that company politics. Do not underestimate how important it is, not only for you to progress your career, because that should be secondary to making sure that you deliver in the role that you're in. And that delivery is as dependent in a corporate environment amongst the corporate teams that you're working with as it is in a purely operating environment with the operators. But when you then, after 8 years of hands-on experience, get into an operating environment, you will have a gut feel of what the business needs to be successful. So well done with the time that you've spent in operations.
All right. That was a very comprehensive answer. Thank you, Natascha, very insightful. There are a number of questions that have been punched in the box. I will come back to those. But before we do that, I just want to talk about your tenure, to date as CEO of Anglo American Platinum. You were having held a number of senior executive positions. You were appointed as CEO of Anglo American Platinum in April 2020. How have you settled into the CEO role since your appointment 2 years ago? And what would you say have been your key achievements to date?
Surviving COVID. I think that was probably all of our biggest achievement over the last 2 years, 2.5 years, wasn't it? Yeah, Prof. Mills, it was a really interesting time. I took over slightly earlier than April because of, I think there was the writing was on the wall for COVID, and the view was making that leadership transition earlier than later. So I really took over basically on the week that as a country we went into hard lockdown. As a company as well, we had a major piece of equipment that is a bottleneck in our value chain broke down. So we basically took out 55% of the world's processing or production of PGMs. So the whole pipeline was standing. So certainly quite an extraordinary time to take over in a time that none of us knew what we were doing. We were all collectively, globally finding our way to how you manage with a global pandemic. I think probably my biggest learning at the time was the value of purpose. We didn't have any cash flow income because, as I said, our value chain was broken. We had a COVID pandemic, so to start off, none of our people were back at work. And we had the question of how do we deal with this? How do we bring people back to work, for starters? Is it safe to bring people back to work? And what do we do with people who can't come back to work because they're either vulnerable or we can't get people back to work yet? And our purpose statement that goes to reimagining mining to improve people's lives. At the core of that, it is interesting very often when you are faced with difficult leadership decisions, having a very clear purpose like that suddenly make things very clear. And that helped us to decide that doesn't matter what the future holds. Financially, we'll make a plan, but we'll continue to look after every employee through this period of time. So I think maneuvering through unprecedented times, being able to lead an extraordinary team of people who stepped up in every way, whether it was the technical challenges with us bringing a furnace back online, a furnace that was crippled and that was had a high risk of running. It was a high risk operation for us to run that. Supporting a team of people who took the right safety and technology decisions on a daily basis, operating that furnace for most of a year, and being brave enough to stand up and say, can't do it anymore. This is not safe to operate anymore. We need to stop. And I think it is an extraordinary opportunity to lead a team like that, and being able to support them was definitely my proudest moment.
There's a lot of comments, an avalanche of comments, which are so positive about what we have been saying, Natascha. I'll read those shortly, but also one, which will echo the next question that I'm going to ask. The mining industry is well known for a toxic patriarchal, culture, and you have decried the abuse of women in mining and stated that women do not feel safe working underground in South African mines. There was a report that was published early this year by the Rio Tinto Group, which detailed the scale and the severity of the problem, not only in South Africa, but in other mining jurisdictions such as Australia. How serious is this problem? And what is being done to change this institutional culture? So here's a question also here, says, from Kele El Fiojo, say, good day, Natasha. Thank you for being an advocate for an enabling culture, but more taking a stand against GBV. More still needs to be done. How do we take men along? And then another one from Garabo. Garabo says, hi, Natasha, you are felt. Thank you for your authenticity. So proud to be part of your team, a laboratory manager, female RBMR. So you will know which division that is. And another one from Spongiles Shongwe. Hi, thank you for the role Anglo American plays in local PGMs beneficiation, especially in encouraging local people to beneficiate platinum, let me say, and its group of metals. Do you think that South African mining is close to bridging the gap in economic participation of previously disadvantaged majorities? So let's take the question on the abuse of women and the need to change the institutional culture, and then we can answer that one afterwards. The one about beneficiation.
Yeah. Just quickly making a note to make sure that I remember all of them. Thank you. I think the reality is that gender-based violence is a societal problem for us in South Africa. I think we've seen the scourge of that through COVID as well, for many reasons. And as a mining industry, we're certainly not isolated from that. In addition to that, and there's no right or wrong in this, it just is. For many years, the mining industry was designed by men for men. When I started in the mining industry, for instance, it was still illegal for women to work shifts on the mine. It was illegal for women to go underground in the mine. So they've made an exception when I started, and I had a chaperone. When I went underground, I couldn't go on my own. When I worked shifts, I always had a chaperone who needed to look after me. Again, an indication of how we've moved on as an industry. What we have done, though, is we have we've pulled women into the industry, very rightly so, without changing the environment that we operate in. So the way that we set up the actual workplace was designed for people with very different capabilities than the average woman. And I'm very careful, and I'm going to apologize up front if I say something that is not entirely correct. My children are teaching me about being woke as well. I'm learning, but I'm not there entirely. So apologies if I get it wrong. But the average woman just cannot do the same level of work that men can do. It is interesting, though, that as we start to think how we change that physical work environment, it becomes safer and healthier for all of the people who works in the mine, not only for women. But in that process, not being deliberate in changing the physical workplace and the culture, we've also created an environment where gender-based violence could thrive. In addition to that, in a world where our processes and systems do not allow women to be transparent, and where when they do make a case of some kind of harassment, and that this, interestingly enough, goes for broader bullying, harassment, not only gender-based violence, because our systems weren't simple, agile, transparent with care and respect. We also started to see women not having the courage anymore to speak up because they weren't heard. So changing that culture starts with how we firstly acknowledge that we do have a problem, and we do. A little story just quickly around this. I went underground at one of our operations fairly recently, and for many years in Women in Mining, we worked on different kind of personal protective equipment for women underground. Amongst them, men normally, well, everybody normally wears a single piece overall, which is difficult for women when they have to use the bathroom. So there was a big fight to change women to allow them to wear two-piece overalls. Talking to this woman, I was surprised to see her not wearing a two-piece overall. And I was just curious, so why not? And she said, well, she feels safer to wear a one-piece overall because if somebody wants to harass her, it's more difficult to get the full-piece overall, one-piece overall stripped off than a two-piece overall. So it's a matter of security. Now, if that doesn't go to your gut, then I don't know what will. If that's this is a senior employee in our business, and it's indicative of we need to acknowledge that we have a problem. In our business, we've seen a number of senior leaders leaving our company because their values and their behavior is not aligned with what we will tolerate in our business. Creating that environment, very clear systems and processes, very clear standards, and what we will and will not tolerate is the starting point on how we shape a culture. How we then bring technology and alternative designs into the workplace is the second portion of how we work in creating a world that is, in any case, more safe and healthy for everybody. So it's really working in two areas, both psychological and physical health and safety for every employee. And the benefit that we get with the diversity that we are getting into the workplace is extraordinary because you get different perspectives, different views of looking at problems and finding different ways to find solutions. And it's really actually a really exciting space to be in. But it is a collective. And we need to consider how we do it inside the gate and how we consider company culture, but also the social context that we operate in. So, and I'm aware, Prof. Mills, sorry, I can talk a lot about these things, but probably...
It's important, yes.
Yeah, thank you. It is important to consider how we address that. We as a company are aware that taking women out of, or the economic empowerment for women is an important step to prevent reliance on an abusive relationship. Mm-hmm. So during COVID, we did spend resources to build and upgrade venues for women that are abused at home. To look after them, but we've also started to look at how do you then go ahead and economically empower them to give them an alternative to have to go back into an abusive relationship. We've started with schools, and there's a beautiful program that we've been running in schools in the last 2 years, and we are involved with more than 100 schools in our local communities, where we started to work with both girls and boys, not women yet, girls and boys on principles around morality, on life choices, on care and respect for each other, on culture and how we think about the diversity of our society. And the benefit of that we could see in the increase of pass rates for matriculants, the reduction of teenage pregnancies, just allowing a very different view on morality. And that's where it starts, because even though we are targeting in the workplace with taking wrong behavior out, building a society there, it's also the long-term work that we need to do to bring our children along and create a very different culture of partnerships and equity, and change that societal behavior.
All right, thank you, Natasha. There are two questions which I think I should air here in this conversation. One from Clement Masinamela. Hi, Natasha, your profile talks for itself. You are the best. Can you quantify the progress of women, both white and black, in metallurgy transformation for your lifetime as in the industry to date? I am a metallurgist, and I know that is one of the jobs women can do easily in the mining industry. That is Clement Masinamela. And the other one is from an anonymous attendee. Hi, Natasha. Thank you for taking time to have this discussion with us. South Africa's share of mining exploration is quite small. What are the 5? You don't have to mention 5, maybe 1. What are the 5 most significant interventions South Africa could execute in order to increase the amount of exploration investment into the country? Those are the 2.
Okay. Thank you for that question. And Clement, I think if I consider the change in certainly in this world of metallurgy, I was in many instances the only female in the world of processing and metallurgy. Now it's very different. We see a number of chemical engineers, metallurgical engineers coming through the pipeline, and not only in the space of chemical and metallurgy, we see them in mechanical engineers, electrical engineers, industrial engineering. So there's definitely a big growth, and I can't, unfortunately, I don't have the numbers off the top of my head. But if I just consider today, I very often will sit in meetings where we jokingly say that we need to work on our diversity because there's no men in the meeting. So that's probably the kind of the transition and transformation that we are seeing. And Prof. Mills, one of the previous questions were, how do we take our men along? And I think that's such an important conversation. The reality is that in my career, it was men who supported me, gave me opportunities, made sure that I don't stumble. And when I stumbled, there was somebody to help me up and teach me. So I think it is important that we appreciate the full diversity of what we need to make the business a success. And it is interesting how we see the shift, but I think it's extremely important for us to maintain the balance in that conversation. Interventions on exploration. I think as a country, we are actually blessed with quite a bit of stability in mining policy and regulations. We are also, interestingly enough, for those of you who might not know, quite progressive in our mining charter, mining legislation. Recently, I've spoken to a delegation from the US who visited South Africa to look at securing critical minerals for the decarbonization journey that the world is going through. And their feedback was that in 130 years, they have not reviewed their mining policies in the US. And that is something that they can actually come and learn from us, because we've been through the hard yards. We've made mistakes, we've learned, and we've moved on. And I think we're in a very clear position on where we are. So given that, I think the biggest benefit or the biggest thing that we need to focus on is how do we create a broader environment for business to come to South Africa. And when we talk about exploration needs to be supported by a future view of starting and financial and running successfully a mining business. Mining generally quite capital intensive. So for somebody to start exploration and pull it through into something that can add value, there needs to be some level of certainty that returns are possible. And I think that economic environment is going to be underscored as we step forward with the work that we're doing in energy. Let's not underestimate. We all feel the frustration when we have rolling blackouts in South Africa. You don't have hot water, you can't make the tea when you want to, you're busy working, you need to. That is hugely disruptive. It's even more disruptive for our economy. Bringing that back will bring a big portion of certainty in bringing capital investment back into the country. And I think that would probably be one of the biggest factors to unlock the private sector, to really see that potential of business in the country again, and to take on opportunities to start exploration, which, by the way, also talks to beneficiation. And that's one of the questions I've missed. Huge opportunity for beneficiation through our metal, through jewelry, but also through the hydrogen economy. I'll stop there for a moment.
Yeah. Oh, you don't have to stop. You know, we're learning, we're listening. As a mining company, Natascha, you know, you've set yourselves a target of reducing emissions by 30% by 2030 and of being carbon neutral by 2040. How much progress have you made in meeting these targets?
So our short-term target for 2024 is a 10% reduction, 30%, as you mentioned, by 2030. Yeah. Now, there's three major contributing factors. And if you will allow me, I will talk to our own business, but I also want to talk to the broader energy transition.
Yeah.
Globally, because I think it's important for us as a country. Now, if you consider that what we're effectively doing is we are changing an economy that was fossil fuel based for over 100 years. If you consider and you go and look at historical prices of what a barrel of oil cost and how, as it grew with technology, with scale, the price of oil and fuel for that matter came down until obviously recent and all of the recent disruptions we saw due to the geopolitics in Russia and Ukraine. But generally, we have over a very long period of time built this economy. What we want to do now in securing the planet for the many of your students and for their children and their children is we need to decarbonize. And in that is huge potential for us. So if I quickly jump into the company, our major contributions to carbon is energy efficiency. We use a lot of energy to extract the metals from underground right to whether it's in mills or furnaces, we use a lot of energy. And how we're effective in that energy is an important factor. That's the first point. We shouldn't waste. And taking waste out of our process is really a critical portion of adding value and limiting our impact. The second one is then between our reliance on Eskom, which is fossil fuels, and diesel. So I'm going to tell you an interesting story quickly, and it is about how we think and our conventional ways of thinking about our business. When we started the journey on getting 30% reduction in our carbon footprint, we started off by looking at a photovoltaic plant for our Mogalakwena operation. Now, from a business point of view, we know that we look at NPVs, we take net present value, we look at internal rate of returns, we look at all of those hurdle rates that we need to make sure that when we deploy capital, we can secure returns from that capital. Now, this didn't pay. We couldn't make any of the hurdle rates. We then stood back and said, okay, we can't make the hurdle rates. What will happen if we just break even? So no returns, but we break even, and the benefit is the fact that we reduce our carbon footprint. Then suddenly the plant was bigger than what we needed. So now we're faced with the kind of challenge that we have with renewables. We need to be able to store it in time for times that the sun doesn't shine or the wind doesn't blow. And then the question was, okay, so how do we store it? And with PGMs playing a very important role in hydrogen, we said, well, let's generate hydrogen. Then the next question was, okay, so what do we use hydrogen for? And the answer to was, let's design a truck that runs on a hydrogen fuel cell and use water as the source of energy through either PEM electrolyzer and then a fuel cell to convert our trucks, that is 20% of our greenhouse gas emissions, into something that is entirely clean. And again, human ingenuity, we brought some of the best, cleverest people in the world, broke through barriers of thinking in so many different ways. The engineering skills that Wits University is very well known for developing, systems engineering, building a truck, 500 tons, a powertrain that can drive 500 tons of weight. That is extraordinary. And it's all hydrogen. So that is the first one. The second one that we're doing as a company is we've looked nationally, and it's interesting about our country for those of you who do not know this. Our country are not only endowed with mineral resources, but we're also endowed with natural resources in the form of wind and solar. And we're one of only a handful of countries who can generate more renewable energy than what we need for our own purposes, which gives us an opportunity to export energy. Now, the other day, I was taken to task and said, well, can we please just make sure that we've got energy before you start talking about exporting energy? But, you know, in the world of WITS and with all of the things that we want to create, we need to think big and we need to think about that future, because if we can step over the challenges we have today in a world that we can say it is a whole new economy, not only bringing all kinds of manufacturing back into the country, but becoming a net exporter of energy at the same time. We've got the Sasol-Fischer-Tropsch process. You can do we've got PGMs, which is critical in the world of hydrogen. 39 of the world's biggest countries all have hydrogen as a key strategy in their decarbonization journey. And these are countries. Japan can only generate 60% of their own energy resource. Europe can only generate about 70% of their own resource. These are all potential markets for us to use our PGMs, to use our natural resource to create a very different economy. To that extent, still back to the company. We've looked at nationally, we've looked at where do we have wind, where do we have solar, and we've developed a pathway to generate between 3 and 5 gigawatts of renewable power. And we have recently announced a terms of heads of agreement with a company called EDF, because they have shovel-ready projects to help us getting on this journey pretty quickly. And with the announcements that government made just a week ago around Eskom, unbundling, supporting, huge potential for us to fast track the work that we are doing in this space.
All right. You know, your company, Natascha, has done very well. You've done very well. We read about this in the papers, and you have made record profits, you know, due to the strong worldwide demand for the company's precious metals, which in turn have been driven by the growing necessity to develop clean technologies. So you spoke earlier about your vision of reimagining, you know, mining for your communities, host communities, for employees, for everybody. How does the company intend to use, you know, these profits that you have generated, the record profits, and how do you ensure that key stakeholders, for example, workers and local mining communities, benefit from these commodity windfalls?
Yeah, I think it's a very relevant question, because as I mentioned earlier, we're mining the resources of the country, so that social contribution needs to balance with the financial contribution that we make to our shareholders because of the capital that they give us to work with. And I'm just quickly opening up numbers here just to make sure that I quote the correct numbers. But we are very careful in balancing our social contribution with our financial contribution. In the first half of this year, and I do apologize, let me just quickly get that number. I mean, it's important that I get the right numbers. I should know this off by heart by now. I've had it so many times, but oh my goodness, I can't lay my hand on it now.
That's fine. We can come back to that. We don't have to.
So I wanted to mention the full contribution. Don't hold me to these numbers, but we have put back more than 17 billion rand into the South African economy in the first half of the year. We are one of the biggest taxpayers between taxes and royalties. We have paid in the order of 6 billion rand on salaries and wages. We have spent just over 1 billion rand on doorstep community spend on big contracts. We have SLP commitments that we pull through, and we see that as a minimum as a minimum contribution, we continue to do more than that minimum contribution. So when we look at it in the end of the day, when it comes out in the wash, when we repay and pay dividends, it is balancing really well with the amount of social contribution we're making. In addition to those dividends, I think just touching on the dividends quickly, one of our biggest shareholders is the PIC. So the dividends go back into the pension funds of many of our South Africans. We now have community trusts who are one of our biggest shareholders at the moment. Their shares are unencumbered, and they have in last year and in this year, between last year's returns to shareholder and this year, probably now have just over $500 million of dividends paid between the two periods that is going back into the community. So between considering taxes and royalties, wages, local procurement, doorstep procurement, dividends to local shareholders, of which our communities is the biggest shareholder. And then the last one I'd want to touch on, it is important to commit the capital that we put back in the business. It is a capital intensive business. If we don't put capital back, we will either destroy the current capital footprint. And the thing about the mining industry, you need to continue to develop new resources, and all of that is capital intensive. If you want to be sustainable, that is a big portion. Now, all of that gets paid before we consider dividends to our shareholders.
Yeah.
So hopefully that gives you a little bit of a mix on how we're giving back.
Yeah. Yes, it does. So before we move on to other themes, as we inching closer to our conclusion, we have about 20 minutes left. I just want to ask two more questions on mining, and then we can talk about leadership and leadership lessons. I see one question is from my daughter, which is about illegal mining. And the question is, hi, Natasha, thank you for participating in this event. One or two questions, so we'll make it one. What is your view regarding the responsibility that mining companies have toward the mine dumps in terms of securing them and ensuring that no illegal mining activity occurs there? Yes, that was a question I was going to ask also, the issue of illegal mining, your view on that and what you think ought to happen. And the next question will be about the future of the mining industry in South Africa itself. You spoke about the central role that the mining industry has played in the past and continues to play in shaping the development of the South African economy. In the 1980s, it accounted for 21% of national economic output. Now you fast forward to 2021, when South Africa was ranked by the Fraser Institute as one of the world's 10 least attractive mining destinations. What in your view ought to happen to turn this vital industry around? And do you think that South Africa can regain its former glory as a mining powerhouse? So one about illegal mining and the other one about the future of the mining industry in terms of the role that it plays in shaping the development of the South African economy.
So I think the illegal mining is premised on the conversation we had around the social realities of our country and the huge unemployment. So do we have an accountability to secure our assets and make sure that it's safe? Absolutely. It's one of those things, and just again, quickly telling a story. Our exposure to legal and illegal mining in platinum is interesting, not in platinum, because to mine the ore and to take it to final metal is really a complex process. So it's different to chrome, different to gold. It's not that easy to get there. But if I then consider the areas that we are exposed, would be in chrome. The other one is where we have illegal miners going underground and stripping out copper wire in old working areas. We recently had an incident where we became aware that we've got illegal miners in old working areas. We've put security out into the areas because they came into some of our ventilation shafts, which, by the way, was totally secured, actually thick concrete slabs casted on top of it to make sure that it's secure. And they just mine next to it and getting access into the, so that's the level of desperation. We have people here that will go underground and stay there for 6 weeks in areas that's not ventilated because it's old working areas. They don't see the sun for 6 weeks. They work there stripping out copper wire, and they probably get a couple of cents in the kilo. So the actual illegal miners do not get the bulk of the benefit. If you want to talk about illegal activity and criminal activity, go and look in Sandton on people who's driving expensive cars, living in big houses. Very often their money is made by people who's trying to make a living and who's prepared to work there in the foulest of environments to strip out copper wire. And the predicament that we have as a mining industry is, from a safety point of view, you cannot legally allow them to go back into that working areas because it's just unsafe. By the time you've made it safe enough for them to work, it's not economically worthwhile anymore. But do we have an accountability? Absolutely, we have. Do we take it? Yes, we do. Are we successful? Only marginally so, if you consider just the recent events. And it is that kind of illegal activity that then triggers horrific incidents like what we've seen in Krugersdorp over the last couple of weeks, because of the amount of money that there is in this illegal environment and without any accountability. So there are many other countries who, and they call it artisanal mining, who's legalized artisanal mining and gave it a legal platform and a way that there is fair value generated by everybody in the value chain. Not a couple of cents in the kilo for copper versus somebody walking away and driving a Maserati in Sandton. And that kind of leveling the playing field, I think it's really important. It is a huge challenge for us as an industry. And again, it is contextually sitting in a world that we can understand why people are desperate to try and make it some level of livelihoods. Future of Mining and Fraser Institute. As a mining industry, we were quite disappointed in the Fraser Institute outcome, because the Fraser Institute did not talk to a single mining CEO to ask our opinion on what we think about the future of mining. So I would argue that talking to universities and university who teaches us how to do research, choosing your audience and carefully designing your research is probably important on what you want the outcome to be. And if you want to have a fair view of what it is, you need to have a more diverse input into. So I'll leave you.
They must come to Wits Business School.
I'll leave Fraser Institute there for a moment. Mining has got an absolute future in South Africa. And I think what is exciting for me about mining is the way that the young generation is going to shape mining for us. We are, on the one hand, we often have the conversation around how modernization and mechanization will negatively impact the jobs. The counter to that is the more effective we get, the more other economic activity we can create through mining. It will be safer, it will be more efficient, it will allow us to pay back our economic rent in a very different way than having people working on the mine. A recent story is we all our drills in our big open pit mine at Mogalakwena are now remotely operated. And the first time we started this now probably 18 months ago, when I visited site to go and see how they're doing it, was all young females. And one young lady told me, because she was operating one drill, she said, well, I'm bored, give me 2 drills. Because, you know, the young generation is very good with their thumbs now. So they know how to operate this technology, but it's a very different mindset that we have in a very different environment for people to contribute. And I think the potential to make mining more energy efficient, more water efficient, bringing new technology into the workplace for us to extract more value lies in the hand of a younger generation that we see coming through, who's challenging our paradigms as the old people in the industry. And how we take that challenge up and shaping the future of mining sits at the heart of this.
Natasha, everyone I've spoken to about you, they say you're a great leader, inspirational leader, fantastic leader, formidable leader, all those descriptions. How do you see yourself as a leader? What kind of leader are you? Your self-perception of yourself.
My self-perception.
As a leader.
I think the one thing that that shapes my my leadership style is probably grounded in the advice that my father gave me. And it is in the advice of, you don't know anything, go and talk to the people who does the job on a daily basis. And if you consider that these people, as I've mentioned at least twice now tonight, or this afternoon, sorry, are the people who are working, but they're also fathers and mothers, community leaders. It is, how do you unlock that potential? Because you get two kind of people who come to work. You get people who come to work because they need to earn a living. They've got 3 things to deliver today. They're just going to deliver your 3 things. And then they're going to sit back, wait for the hours to go. The question in leadership is, how do we unlock the discretionary energy in people? How do we get that people, you've done your 3 things, I'm now going to do a 4th thing because I'm excited to be here. I understand the contribution that I can make. I am empowered to make that contribution. It's like this young lady to say, give me another drill to operate. I can do this. It is creating an environment where people can come to work on a daily basis, really being empowered to make an impact. None of us get up in the morning thinking, I want to do, well, some of us do, but most of us wake up in the morning wanting to make an impact, do our best, and come home tonight and feel I've achieved something. And it's, how do we set up environment to do that? And it is an environment where ego can't play a role. It is an environment where listening and curiosity about people is important. And it is an environment where people who actually do the work will make mistakes. And how do we allow people to make mistakes in a safe way and learn from them? Because I think failure is failure just as far as we don't learn from our mistakes. Mistakes is not failure. But we need to create an environment where it's safe for people to make mistakes, learn and grow from them. And that's the kind of environment that I'm hoping that we're working on shaping for our people at Anglo American Platinum.
Any career highlights, any regrets, career regrets?
Having fatalities in our industry is always something that goes to the gut. My first fatality was a young man, was 19 years old. He finished he's finished school the previous year, December, and he passed away in a horrific incident in July the following year. Considering any fatality is just a failure of management to make sure that we create an environment that is safe for every colleague to work safely. Losing somebody that's at the start of their life, their journey, their career is absolutely gut-wrenching. And consider that my son is probably just slightly older than what this young man was. It really brings home the accountability that we have as an industry, as leaders in the industry. It needs to be totally integrated, every aspect of how we do our business. So my biggest regrets are certainly fatalities that we have in our industry. I think marijuana was one of those moments that you had to stand back and do deep soul searching and saying, well, what is my contribution to make sure that it never happens again? Highlights are very often when the teams are successful. is when you do set, so you've asked the question around Lonmin. What's a highlight for me is we've done that change and that turnaround, and it was still paying dividends in terms of the strong systems and culture that we've built at least 10 years after we've made that change. That's a highlight, because that's the measure of success. The measure of success is not what you achieve today and tomorrow. That also feels good. Of course it does. When you end the year and you've got good operational performance, that is good. But the real measure of success, if you can look across your career and say after 10 years, your impact is still felt. Well, because that's very often where the biggest opportunity is to make a contribution. Is not what happens whilst you're there, it's what happens after you've left. And those are moments when you get feedback and say, well, this is still going, and you remember what we've done there, we're still doing it, it's still adding value. Those are the moments. And then seeing people coming through the talent pipeline, and people when you've employed that as youngsters out of university and now they're in senior roles, that is impactful.
You're an extremely busy woman, Natasha. How do you relax? What are your hobbies? How do you relax?
Hobbies.
We're in Australia now. We're in Australia, traveling, commuting, all this, how do you relax?
The thing I like most is to do things that's got quick turnaround times. So weeding a bed in my garden, because everything else that I do today takes 3 or 4 years to get to some kind of outcome. You make decisions and you trust that directionally, but you don't have instant gratification. Everything you need to be patient. So I'm looking for instant gratification. Cleaning out cupboards, you can stand back in an hour and gosh, this looks good. And then I think being active. I really like to train. I like to train really hard. Various kinds of exercises, and doing that with my family is really fun as well. So those are the kind of things. Drinking wine, but I won't say that too loud.
That's allowed. It's allowed on this platform. Before I ask you the last question, Natasha, I think I would like to squeeze this one quickly because it's an important question from Thomas Connolly. Hi, Natasha. Thanks for your inspirational insights and a great path you are leading our organization on. Considering the varying degrees of local and global uncertainty and turmoil and the fast approaching low end of the commodity cycle, how are we and should South African mining companies be hedging themselves against what is looking to be a tough and uncertain future?
There's a couple of things that comes to mind. The first thing is stable, capable operations to ensure safety and low cost and reducing waste is the best thing we can do. It is, we need to continue to set up the industry in that way, because not only do we make sure that we run an effective business, we secure livelihoods for, in our case, 30,000 people. So at the base of that, that's really important. The other reality is the uncertainties that we see today is not going to be unique going forward. I would argue that we're going to continue to see a big rate of change in the environment that we operate in. Uncertainty and chaos is going to be part of the environment that we need to operate in. And if I can use the analogy, I've often said to my children, it doesn't matter what happens in the world around us. Tonight, when we close the kitchen door, we need to be able to trust each other. We need to know how things work in this household. And there needs to be a level of stability that we can all fall back on. That talks to trust, it talks to care and respect. It's no different to our business. How do we set up our business that our normal day-to-day operation runs as smooth as a Swiss watch? And then it doesn't matter what happens around us in the environment. It can be great chaos. We will stick it through. And I think an important principle, and we've changed the language that we use, is the principle of anti-fragility. Because there's the principle here that we build a business that can learn and get stronger despite the changes we see. Because the only reality we have, it's going to come at us, it's going to come hard and consistent at us. But if we build an organization that's stable and continue to learn and grow and get stronger, that's where we want to be.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much. Just under a minute, this last question, and then we close. I was looking at your Twitter account and I realized that you follow Cristiano Ronaldo, who's a footballer. So is he your favorite footballer? Why are you following Ronaldo on Twitter?
Oh my goodness. You know, it's one of those interesting things. I know nothing about football. What I am very curious about is what makes people successful. I'm also curious, and I was quite disappointed in a period of time that we went through, that all of our sports stars were really disappointing us, weren't they? They didn't set good examples, and they all had all kinds of personal, let's call it failures, that I felt was really disappointing, because our children and so many of our young people look up at these big sports stars. So what I'm continuously curious about is what makes people successful and what makes them successful while being grounded.
Wonderful.
Yep.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Natasha, that's how we come to the end of this afternoon's conversation. Thank you very much for your time. This was a very inspiring, instructive conversation. And thanks for your leadership and service to our country. I'd like to thank everyone in the audience who participated in this event and those who attended. I'd also like to thank my colleagues at WBS and Amplats who have worked behind the scenes to make this event a reality. From WBS, JT Carson, Alcin Gaylard, Rutendo Numalo, Tembega Thachwayo, Ikeleng Ramayama, and Rehandu Makama, and from Amplats, Chiane August, Yadamari, and Nomonde Dwalaza. Thank you, everyone, and good evening. Thank you, Natasha. We really appreciate your time. That's how we come to the end of the conversation.
Thank you, Prof. Mills, and thank you for the opportunity.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Good evening.
Thank you. Bye-bye.